I started this assignment because I found, being in radio for 20 years, I found that music was like the perfect time machine. When I was in radio, there was a time, you're probably not going to believe this, there was a time where you could not download your favorite song. You actually had to go to a store and buy, well, they were called records. They were these little round things, and they were like made of vinyl, and you put them on a turntable. Then you took a needle, and you put that on, and you play the record. And that's basically how you got your music. There might even be a time where you'd go to the record store, you'd want to hear the newest Journey album. You remember Journey, don't you? You want to hear the newest Journey album, and it'd be sold out. It's gone. So then you'd have to call me at the radio station and say, please, Mr. Davidson, could you go ahead and play Open Arms by Journey? And then I'd have the power to say no, or yes, right? Now, I was about 21 when I was in radio, and very young, many, many years ago. And there was this one young lady who'd call every night at 9 o'clock. She wanted to hear Open Arms by Journey. One of the things that happens when you work in music, you become very cynical. It's sort of like working in a candy store or a bakery, you know? You're around this stuff all the time. You never want to eat it. It all smells bad and tastes bad because it's part of your work. And so we became very cynical about all the music that was popular. If you listen to Journey, you were a jerk. You were a complete idiot. Nobody wants to hear that stuff. So this one girl, since I was 21, and she was a woman, and I wanted to get to know her better, I played the song for her all the time. And finally I asked her, why do you want to hear this bad song? And she said, well, Journey, Open Arms, that was the song that basically I met my boyfriend with. He was the guy I fell in love with. He was the guy I was going to marry. I said, oh, so you're married? No, actually he cheated on me, broke my heart. Well, then why do you want to hear this song? You got to understand, I was 21, she was like 25 or 28. She was an older woman. And she said, no, when you get older, you're going to learn this. There aren't good memories and there aren't bad memories. There's just memories. And that's what music does for us. Wherever you are at a certain time, even if you hated the song, when you hear that song, it's like you go back in the past and you're there again. And that music just has that power over us. Well, back in 1991, Eric Clapton, who wrote this song, Tears in Heaven, he had everything going for him. He was on top of the charts, he was a #1 rock star, and he had a son, a 2-year-old little boy called Connor. And he was living in a Manhattan high-rise. And what happened was somebody left the window open, and Connor fell out the window and died. What do you do when something that's senseless, have a senseless death like that? Nobody to blame, nobody to get angry at, it just happens. And Eric Clapton basically wrote a song, this song, Tears in Heaven. And he said it healed him, it cured him. Now, those of us in radio who played the song, and we said it was a bunch of crap, we said, I can't believe this guy. His son dies. He writes a song about it. He exploits his son's death to get a hit record. That was our attitude. That was my attitude as a disc jockey. Music healed him. I obviously had a lot to learn. My mother had been dying for about 10 years. And it's just amazing how, when I say that, how much we can accept as normal when we're living in denial. About every 2 years or so, sometimes it seemed like once a year, I'd get a call from home. And it'd be my brother, Craig. You got to come back home. Mom's dying. You want to say goodbye. You really need to come and see her. And I'd come back to Wisconsin, and she'd be in the emergency room or wherever she was at. Usually she'd be out within that day. And we'd go to a restaurant, have a nice meal. Or I'd have a nice meal. She'd buy it for me. And then I'd go back home, and she'd be fine again. So I got used to those kinds of phone calls all the time. You see, my mother, she was probably the smartest human being I ever met, except when it came to her own health. My mother taught medical technology at Western Wisconsin Technical Institute. In fact, she even began the union, the teachers' union there at Western Wisconsin Technical Institute. She taught medical technology. She knew all about health, the body, the mind, except about hers. Now, my mother was about my height, but weighed anywhere between 250, sometimes 280 pounds. And she despised herself. Now, the time in which I'm talking, that was not a politically correct time. And nobody knew anything about anorexia, bulimia. Basically, she was just fat. If you were overweight, you were fat. And so my mother despised herself. Absolutely hated herself. Now, the best memory I got of my mom is always coming home. She'd have all these lab books that she'd have to grade. She'd have the lab books in her chair on her lap. The television would be on. She was great at multitasking. She'd have a cigarette dangling from her mouth because she smoked like a chimney, a bottle of Diet Right Cola, and grading these papers. And once a week, she would go on a diet, some sort of crash diet, whatever was new. By the end of that week, by Friday, she'd have abandoned the diet and basically be up at 2 in the morning frying herself an egg sandwich, covered it with ketchup, and the diet would be over. So she was desperately trying to find a way to lose this weight. Whenever she'd see someone overweight walk by, she'd always say something like, "There's Joyce. There's fat old Joyce." That's how much she hated herself. Well, finally they came out with this miracle cure. They still have it today, but this was the first time they actually had it. And it was a medical operation. What they do in this operation is they cut out your stomach. Basically cut out your stomach, and they leave you this little balloon that will now act as your stomach. And it can only expand so far. The idea is, since it only holds so much, you can only eat so much, and when it fills up, it forces you to vomit. Not very pleasant, but it did work. And what happens is, after a while, you learn how much you can eat. You learn how not to vomit. Well, the only problem is, my mother never stopped the vomiting. Ever. But it did work. She was very, very sick for a while. This was a brand new operation. My mom was one of the first in the country to ever have this operation. She went to the Mayo Clinic for it, and she was in bed for almost a month. It was, we're talking a major surgery. But it worked. The pounds just began dropping off of her. And continued to drop off of her, even as the years passed by. As I said, after a period of 6 months, you're supposed to know when to stop the vomiting. It's kind of funny. After my mom did die, we found notes she'd written to herself. These were notes after she had been given intravenous feeding, when she'd gone up from 75 pounds to 80 pounds. And the notes all said, "Fat pig, fat sow, fat Joyce is back." So no matter where she got with her weight decline, whenever she looked in the mirror, she still saw fat Joyce and hated fat Joyce. Well, now the thing that happens when weight comes off you this fast, you're not just losing fat. You are losing bone. You are losing good cells. You are losing stuff that you need. And my mom got to about 75 pounds. And it got to the point where my mom couldn't walk. Basically, she was one of the first on our block to get one of those Roscoe scooters. You know, in Walmart, you'll see people riding on those things all over the place, back and forth. Well, she had to have it not because she was overweight, but because now she couldn't walk. And so she'd always ride around in that scooter. And people would say, well, people, I say people because I wasn't there. I basically was in radio. I'd come and visit whenever I got these phone calls about her health. But people would say to her, my brother in particular, "Mom, you have to eat something. Mom, this isn't healthy. Mom, you have to eat." But Mom knew that eating, keeping it in her stomach, meant getting fat again. So she never stopped the vomiting. The thing that happens is that little balloon, that becomes basically filled with pus and acid and becomes just an ulcer factory. So my mother was in great pain all the time. And of course, never eating. One time I got one of those phone calls, and it was from my mom. She was in the hospital. And she was calling me to come and get her. Because my brother, see, now he was the brave one. My brother realized this can't go on. So he essentially did an intervention, and he had her committed to a hospital where they were force feeding her intravenously. So I went to see my mom, and she was basically tied to the bed with the tubes going into her. And my mom made me make 2 promises. 1, get me the hell out of here. And 2, if Craig ever does this again, I want you to find some way to kill me. Well, I told you Craig was the brave one. I said yes to both promises and got her out of there. And then we had to talk about how we could help her to suicide if we needed to go that direction. So you see, my mom was in a real bad way. And I was pretty much completely in denial. Then, of course, I left again. Went back to my job in radio. When I got the final call, come and see your mom, I was basically working in McAllen, Texas. It was at my last radio station. All radio was in trouble by this point. It wasn't hurt by the internet yet. That didn't exist. It was hurt by something called rap music. All top 40 stations didn't know what to do with rap music. There were some people who hated rap music so much they wouldn't listen to your station if you played a single rap song. And of course, top 40, which is for the younger generation, they wanted to hear some rap. So how did you fight with that? Well, we were being hurt terribly in the ratings. My wife was having an affair with someone over the border in McAllen. So my job, my personal life, everything was going downhill. So when I got the call, I said, Craig, hey man, I've got a job here. I've got a life. I'm trying to hold it together. I can't come back. I'm sorry. I'm busy. And he said, well, Kirk, that's fine. But if you want to say goodbye to Mom, this will be your last chance. And so I still was going to say no, believe it or not. I'm ashamed to say it, but I still was going to say no. But I got that feeling right back here that you'll get every now and then. And it's always wise to always listen to that when it's talking to you back there. And it said, yes, I really do have to go this time. I remember when I got on the plane, I was certain Mom was going to be fine. I'm sure we'd get her out of the hospital. She'd take me to her favorite restaurant. This is what she loved to do, take me to her favorite restaurant, and then she'd watch me eat. And we used to say, Mom, how can you enjoy that? No, I just like seeing you eat. Then she'd take a bite of something and then go to the bathroom and vomit it up. And I thought, sure, that's how we were going to end the weekend. My plane stopped in Chicago, and McAllen was sunny and bright, just like it is here today. And Chicago, of course, was rainy and cold and wet. And then I got that feeling again. I got that feeling, a feeling that was so intense, I wanted to get back on the airplane right away and get back, to get to Wisconsin. Once I got on the plane, though, it's amazing how the mind works. Once I got back on that plane, I convinced myself, no, man, it's because of Chicago. It's wet. It's cold. It looks like a funeral. Of course you're thinking that way. When we got to the Wisconsin airport, when I got to the airport, my wife didn't come along for the reasons I mentioned. I got to the luggage area, and my sister-in-law was there to meet me, and she said, forget the luggage. We can't wait for the luggage. We'll get it later. And I said, what do you mean forget the luggage? My music logs are in there. Everything I got to do for the station is in there. She said, Kirk, we got to get in the car and go now. She got me in the car, and she proceeded to run stoplights, which my sister-in-law never does. So my mother died at 6 o'clock, and I got there at 6:10. My sister-in-law did everything she could to get me there, believe me. Now, what had happened, essentially, that stereotypical thing that when you're old, and my mother essentially become a 70 or 80-year-old woman, even though she was my age now, had essentially slipped and fallen and broke her hip. And when she broke her hip and then they put her in the ambulance, they took her to the hospital, something had happened to hit her heart because she was very weak. And there was a point where they took her to x-ray her and they put her on the x-ray machine, and between putting her on the x-ray machine and getting her back into the wheelchair, she went into a heart attack. And so essentially that's what was happening when my sister-in-law was trying to beat the lights to get me there. I used to teach theater, acting, and my acting students always, when they'd reach a point in the play where something dramatic happens, well, you know how actors are, right? That's where you get the term drama queen. They always want to overact everything. Something happens, they want to yell, they want to scream, they want to do something big and physical. And I always tell them, and it's from this experience, that really isn't what happens. When something big and traumatic happens that you're not expecting to happen, you shut down. You don't know what to do. You basically close off. And that's the other thing that's really, really important. If you have a mother who loves you, that is the one and only time in your life you're going to get unconditional love. Being a teacher, I've learned there's a lot of students who don't even have that. They don't even have that one time. And that's really a tragedy. But I had it. I guarantee you, will never get that again. Only a mother loves that unconditionally, that completely. And now I was 35 at the time all this happened. Even when you're an adult, there is some part of your brain that thinks, Mom's always going to be there. Mom will always, that love will always be there. And you are shocked, even though I said at the beginning of this, my mom had been dying for 10 years, I never thought she would. I never thought she would. And I remember completely the moment there. It was, my mom was lying there. She looked like she was 180. When you die, the jaw drops open. And my sister-in-law was trying to close the jaw and couldn't. And I said, I feel terrible because I wasn't able to say goodbye. And my brother told me something. In a way, my mother had said goodbye to me. Because while my sister-in-law was racing red lights to get me there, my mom was talking to Craig, but calling Craig Kirk. And Craig said, no, I'm Craig. Kirk's on his way. And Mom said, that's good. That's good. And those were her last words. So in a way, she did say goodbye to me. Now, the next thing to deal with was the funeral. My brother, again, pretty much took care of all of that. My mother had made us promise there'd never be a funeral. She felt they were barbaric. She hated them. But as you know, a funeral isn't for the dead. The funeral is for the living. It's our one last chance to say goodbye. So yes, there was going to be a funeral. The funeral director was really understanding, really nice, tried to make everything go smoothly. But then she'd said, listen, who's going to do the eulogy? We didn't have an answer for that. Well, I will get this one priest. There's a Catholic priest I know, and he's great. He'll make it sound like he knew your mom forever. And that's where we said, no, hell no, we can't do that. My mom would be pissed, and she'd come back, and she'd be really upset. Because my mother was pretty much a born-again atheist. She hated religion with a passion. And she had reasons for this, though. I didn't know them until actually late in her life. She told me once a story about, as she was trying to work as a nurse in an emergency room, a child, 6, 7 years old, had been brought in, who'd been hit by a car, had some kind of terrible accident. But the child had a band that said Christian Scientist, meaning they couldn't give any medicine, any medical aid really to this child if the parents didn't allow it. Keep it comfortable, but that's it. Couldn't do anything to fix it. And the child essentially was bleeding, and bleeding to death before their eyes. Sid wanted ice cream, so they brought the child ice cream. And my mom said the memory of watching this child eat ice cream while bleeding into it, trying to eat it before it melted, was more than she could take. So my mother hated religion. So we couldn't have a priest there talking for her. So I said, okay, I'll give the eulogy. Now you got to understand, I didn't cry when I saw my mom. I didn't. So I was afraid, Mike, what if I do it at the eulogy? That would be awful if I lost it there. And Mom hated displays of emotion. Again, she'd be upset. But I did it, and this is the other interesting thing. I told you Mom brought her work home, the lab books. She'd bring those lab books home, work that. Here's the part of it I didn't know. We had a little chapel, right? And there was no room for all the students who wanted to come and say goodbye. And past students who wanted to just talk about how Joyce got her through medical school. Without Joyce, I wouldn't have got through that first exam. And on and on and on. And the line went all the way around. And I was amazed by that. A side of my mom I never knew, right? I got through the eulogy, managed to get through it. I felt very good about that. I talked to my brother recently. We hadn't seen each other in about 15 years. And he did tell me, he said, no, that eulogy, that was one of the best things you ever did. And I'm so glad you were able to do that. And that meant a lot. And he told me that just this last summer. But I left again right away. After you die, what you're going to find out is we leave a whole lot of mess behind us that someone has to clean up. Bills, the house, all kinds of things. And naturally, I ran back to McAllen to do my radio job. My brother stayed behind to take care of the real work. When you're a program director at a radio station, as soon as you get back into town, and I wanted to deal with this radio station that was failing, that was going downhill, first thing you do is you turn on the radio. And as I turned on the radio, the song that was playing, that was number one on our charts, was this song. hate that song. I heard that song, and that's when I cried. I basically couldn't drive. I just stopped there. I had to pull over and just cried. And if there is a heaven, again, my mom would be really pissed because she hated being wrong. But if there is one, she definitely earned her place in it. But that song, that stupid song that I put down so much, that song allowed me to finally say goodbye to my mother.